Imagine you're driving a car on the open highway. You've got a clear destination, your hands on the wheel, eyes forward. Suddenly, another car swerves into your lane, honks, gestures, maybe even shouts something through the window. You now have a choice. Do you slam the brakes, roll down your window, and argue? Or do you keep driving, steady, unshaken because you know where you're going? That's what power looks like. And that's what Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone. When you stop your journey to defend yourself, you hand the other driver control. You let their detour become your focus. But if you stay calm, if you keep your course, you don't just protect your energy. You flip the power instantly. Machiavelli believed that defending yourself often signals weakness, not because you're wrong, but because you're reacting. And in any power dynamic, who reacts first loses. In today's video, we'll unpack why defending yourself feels good short-term but costs long-term, how powerful people reframe attacks instead of absorbing them, and Machiavelli's subtle technique to maintain control without saying much at all. This applies to personal life, work drama, social media, even family arguments. The trick? Learn to drive past the noise. Because the moment you defend, you pull over and give them the keys. Stop sign now. I want to hear from you. What's one time you wish you hadn't defended yourself? Drop your story in the comments below. What was said? How did you respond, and how would you handle it differently now? I'll pin the best comment and we might break it down in a future video. Here's the bottom line. Not every challenge deserves your response. Not every accusation deserves your attention. Your silence, your calm, your focus, that's your power. Let them honk. Let them veer. You stay on the road. Let's get into it. There's a moment, a breath, a heartbeat, a silent, split-second decision you make when someone calls you out, when they accuse you, question your character, your intent, your worth. And in that moment, almost everyone trained by culture, by school, by morality does the same thing. They defend themselves. I didn't mean it. That's not what I was trying to say. You misunderstood me. I swear I'm not like that. It sounds noble, reasonable, even fair. But to Machiavelli, that's the moment you lose everything. Why? Because the second you defend yourself, you admit you're weak enough to need to. And in power games, weakness is never just perceived, it's punished. The moment you flinch, you don't inspire sympathy. You signal vulnerability. And predators don't feel sorry for the wounded. They circle them. This is the brutal law Machiavelli understood before most had words for it. The man who defends himself lowers himself. But the man who doesn't? He forces the world to defend him. Let's get one thing straight. Defending yourself almost never convinces anyone. It doesn't validate your character. What it does is this: it shifts the power away from you. Because when you explain yourself, you're stepping onto their field. You're playing their game. You're accepting their framing of the situation. And whether you realize it or not, you're saying, you have the authority to judge me. I need to prove myself to you. And once you do that, they own the narrative. They dictate the tone. You're no longer the main character, you're just a witness defending the accused. Yourself. Even if you're right, even if your logic is perfect, you still look guilty. Because only the weak rush to explain. The strong? They let the silence burn. They let the accusation float in the air, untouched, unbothered. And that unsettles people. Why? Because silence is a mirror. When you say nothing, the accuser starts hearing only themselves. And most people can't stand that. That's the real Machiavellian move. Turn the accusation into a mirror. Let their words bounce back at them. Let them doubt themselves. Make them look too emotional, too invested, too eager to tear someone down. Because the one who speaks first loses control of the frame, and Machiavelli knew, whoever controls the frame controls the outcome. Most people defend themselves because they want to be understood. But being understood is a therapeutic goal, not a strategic one. If you want to be understood, go to therapy. If you want to be in control, embrace mystery. You don't want clarity. You want leverage. Because power doesn't come from being understood. It comes from being feared, respected, unpredictable, untouchable. So when someone says, "You're arrogant, you're cold, you're manipulative," and you instantly jump in, "No, that's not true. You're misreading me," you've already lost. Because now you're reacting. Now you're proving you care. Now you've handed them the most Machiavellian asset you had, your mystique. Think of the most powerful people you've ever met, not the loudest, not the most praised, the most untouchable. They weren't explaining themselves. They weren't arguing back and forth. They were watching. Silent. Composed. Still. Their presence alone made people hesitate. Because they didn't need to prove anything. And that silence? It wasn't passive. It was a weapon. Machiavelli would tell you this: he who explains himself submits. He who remains silent forces others to fill in the blanks, and they often overestimate him. That's the trick. When you say nothing, people's minds run wild. They start thinking, wait, what if he doesn't care because he's right? What if she didn't respond because she's so far ahead, it's not even worth it? What if he knows something we don't? That's the frame flip. Now the spotlight isn't on you. It's on them. They start to look around, seeking validation, trying to confirm that their accusation landed, and they find nothing. Just silence. Just you. Calm. Detached. Still. That's how you make their power collapse. Let's go deeper. You walk into a room. A group, a meeting, a dinner. Someone takes a shot, subtle or sharp. Maybe they jab your success. Maybe your tone. Maybe your history. Everyone hears it. Everyone turns to you. This is your move. Say nothing. No smirk. No frown. No counter. Just stillness. And that silence? That complete lack of reaction? It sends shockwaves. Because now the room starts wondering, why didn't he react? Does he know something we don't? Is he above this? Did that attack just make him stronger? You just flipped the social frame. Because people aren't watching the accusation, they're watching your response. And silence, when paired with presence, speaks louder than any defense ever could. Machiavelli didn't just study politics. He studied psychology. And he understood something most leaders never do. Power isn't what you say. Power is what people believe you could say, but choose not to. Now, here's the coldest move of all. Sometimes you don't just ignore the accusation. You invert it. They call you manipulative? You smile. You glance past them. You say, if that's how you see it. Not defensive. Not sarcastic. Just detached. What happens next? They scramble. They were baiting you. They wanted a fight. They wanted to see you panic, to squirm, to prove them right. Instead, you left them holding their own accusation like a weapon with no target. And now they look exposed. Emotional. Insecure. They start to wonder, did they go too far? Did they embarrass themselves? Are they the one who looks petty? Yes, they do. You just made them carry their own emotional energy. And you didn't lift a finger. That's the power of restraint, of presence, of refusing to flinch. There's a moment after the silence is dragged just long enough when the whole room feels it. The tension shifts. Not on you. On them. Suddenly, the accuser doesn't look like a bold truth teller. They look like they're begging for attention. Desperate for reaction. And you? You didn't just look innocent. You looked untouchable. That's something even innocence can't guarantee. Innocence can be questioned, retested, cross-examined. But untouchable? That's a status. You're not reacting because you're not on trial. You're not defending because you don't accept the premise. You're not playing the game because you set the rules. And the rule is simple. Silence isn't surrender. It's domination, not by force, but by presence. Not by argument, but by mystery. Not by proving your side, but by letting them crumble in their own overreach. Machiavelli would say, let them attack. Let them reveal their emotion, their instability, their hunger for conflict, while you unmoved become the mirror that exposes their chaos. In the end, power isn't about how loud you can be. It's about how many people fall silent when you say nothing at all. Machiavelli understood something most people will never fully grasp. Words are not meant to clarify truth, they are used to obscure it. And in the world of power, control, and human behavior, that truth changes everything. Because when someone suddenly or blatantly attacks you, they don't want clarity. They don't want resolution. What they want is to trap you in the fog, to bait you into a tangle of emotional explanation, self-defense, justifications, tone shifts, and nervous energy. They want to see you unravel. And here's why. The more you explain, the less certain you appear. The more words you use, the more doubt you signal. In the eyes of others, the person who rushes to explain always looks like they have something to hide even if they're innocent. So what's the Machiavellian counter? You don't fight the fog. You become the sky behind it. Let the silence breathe. Let them fill it. Let them talk. Because when you refuse to take the bait, they overextend. They speak too long. They over-explain. They repeat themselves. They try to force their point, and in doing so, they expose their emotional investment. They begin to look desperate, unstable, paranoid. You haven't said a single word, but now they're the one under scrutiny. Why? Because people don't just listen to what's said, they watch who's calm and who's rattled. That's social power. And it doesn't come from being right. It comes from being untouchable. Let's make this practical. You're in a business meeting. A colleague throws subtle shade across the table. I'm not sure that strategy was really thought through. Or maybe he always brings these bold ideas, sometimes a little too bold. They're not arguing. They're provoking. They want you to jump in, to lean forward, to clarify, to justify, to flinch. And most people will. They'll lean forward with a forced smile, voice slightly shaky, trying to prove themselves. They'll say things like, well, actually, the strategy was developed over 3 weeks. I don't think you're seeing the whole picture. This idea is grounded in data, but it's too late. The room smells blood. You're on the defensive. The Machiavellian operator does the opposite. He leans back, maybe even smirks. He lets the moment sit. He refuses to bite. And if he chooses to speak, it's not to defend, it's to redirect. Let's hear your strategy then. Suddenly, the spotlight shifts. The room flips. Now the accuser has to perform. Now they're being judged. Now they are under pressure. Because silence from the confident is a silent accusation. It makes people feel small without you needing to say a thing. This tactic isn't limited to business. In personal relationships, it's even more dangerous. Say your partner looks at you and says, "You don't care about me anymore." The average person panics. They rush in with, "That's not true. I've been busy, but I still care. You're overreacting." They start explaining. They try to soothe, to defend. And in doing so, they validate the emotional frame. They accept the premise of the accusation. But the Machiavellian move is different. You don't dismiss. You don't argue. You let the weight of the statement hang in the air. You give it space to echo. You watch them sit in their own drama, their own emotion, Then, when it's time to speak, if you speak at all, you say, "That's not how I see it." Short, grounded, neutral, no explanation, no defense. Suddenly, they are uncertain. They wonder, was I overreacting? Did I sound too emotional? Why is he so calm? Because in that moment, you held something more powerful than words, control of the emotional tempo. And whoever controls the tempo controls the frame. There's a colder tactic, a deeper level. The elite play. Not only do you remain calm under attack, you disappear. Someone insults you online? They throw shade in a group chat? They try to provoke you through others? Don't block them. Don't reply. Don't post back. Don't acknowledge. Just vanish. Let your absence scent like a mirror. Let them shout into silence. This breaks most people in two ways. First, they realize you didn't even deem them worthy of a response. That alone is a wound to their ego. Second, they're left with no closure. No reaction to validate their emotional investment. And that's when the spiral begins. They post more. They talk to others. They double down. They start to look obsessed. They try to bait you out, to trigger something. But you remain still. And now, to everyone watching, they look unhinged. They're talking to themselves. They're chasing a ghost. And that's when you've already won. Not because you convinced anyone, but because they destroyed their own image trying to pull you down and failed. Now here's where the game turns surgical. The highest level. Don't just remain silent. Invert the accusation. Someone calls you arrogant? Strange how confidence makes some people uncomfortable. They say you're manipulative? Only those who can't be influenced say that. They call you fake? Sometimes being real just doesn't look familiar to some. You're not defending. You're reframing. You're turning their attack into a reveal of their own insecurity. And that's what the greats know. Power isn't about appearing flawless. It's about making your flaws look like threats, not weaknesses. The attacker ends up looking like someone reacting emotionally to your presence, your style, your strength. And suddenly, their words say more about them than they do about you. So remember this. In power dynamics, the loudest voice rarely wins. The one who wins is the one who doesn't need to speak. Everyone says that line when they stop getting what they want. You've changed. You're toxic. You think you're better than us. They're not revealing truth. They're revealing pain. And you don't deny the accusation, you make it their insecurity. That's not defense. That's dominance. And suddenly, they're the ones on their back foot, scrambling to explain, to justify, to reclaim lost ground. What just happened wasn't a counterattack. It was a reversal of gravity. A judo throw of social power. You didn't resist their emotional force, you used it. Redirected it. Turned their own momentum into their public unraveling. Machiavelli would call this the turn of the blade. Never meet the sword with a shield. Let the attacker fall on their own steel. Let them pierce themselves with their own intent. Because the moment you start chasing the narrative, you're already conceding the battlefield. The world has conditioned you to defend your name, to explain your truth, to prove your innocence. But Machiavelli saw the deeper trap. He knew that the moment you chase innocence, you admit guilt. Why? Because only the guilty feel a need to explain. So the true strategist doesn't play defense at all. He appears too composed to be rattled, too elevated to engage, too grounded to explain. And as he holds this posture, the attackers begin to crack. They repeat themselves. They raise their tone. They look to others for support. But the support doesn't come because the room is watching. Watching who looks stable and who looks shaken. You said nothing. But now, they are the ones under judgment. Because in social dynamics, the more you defend, the more it looks like you need to. But the more you ignore, the more dangerous they assume you are. And that assumption, that mystery, is where power is born. Most people think power is about proving yourself, proving you're right, proving you're kind, proving you're not what they say you are. But Machiavelli would smirk at this. Because the moment you try to prove something, you've already declared that the other person's judgment matters. You've granted them authority over your image. And when you do that, you've handed them the leash. Now, they own you. Let's make this real. You're at a group dinner. Someone throws a jab across the table. You always act like you know everything. Or, I guess being humble isn't really your thing, huh? The average person tenses up. They force a chuckle. They say something like, No, I was just trying to help. Or worse, they explain themselves, trying to soften the blow. What they don't realize is they just confirmed the hit landed. Now the table sees the target flinch. Now everyone's attention is on the defense. And that alone makes the original jab look more true. What does the Machiavellian do? He pauses. He holds 2 seconds of silence. He scans the room not with anger, but with quiet amusement. As if to say, that's cute. And maybe he replies with something calm and precise, interesting take. Or, you seem emotional today. Or nothing at all. Just a slow, level gaze. What happens next is predictable. The attacker begins to fidget. They try to explain their joke. They laugh nervously. They look for backup and it's not there. Because the heat of the room just turned against them. Your silence told everyone something louder than words ever could. I'm not the one under judgment. They are. And now you flip the entire frame. In the digital world, this dynamic moves even faster. Callouts, subtweets, DM, public accusations. People think the game is about fighting back, setting the record straight. But Machiavelli would tell you the brutal truth. In the court of public opinion, silence equals guilt unless your silence commands fear. So what do you do when attacked online? Don't explain. Don't react. Don't clarify. Distort. Redirect the energy into the crowd. Take the accusation and convert it into power. They say, you're manipulative. You're toxic. You post. People always call you dangerous when they can't control you. What happened? You didn't deny it. You reframed it. You made the accusation sound like a threat, not a flaw. Now they look bitter. You look unfazed. The audience watching? They don't see damage control. They see narrative dominance. Let's go deeper. Let's get surgical. There are 3 weapons you use instead of defending yourself. 1. Silence the default. Cold. Undeniable. It exposes the attacker's need for validation. It lets them punch shadows and look foolish doing it. 2. Deflection. You don't address the jab. You reframe the story. Shift attention without conceding any ground. Example, they say, you're fake. You reply, I don't owe you authenticity. You didn't argue. You asserted. 3. Precision cuts short, sharp truths that end the game immediately. No rambling. No justifying. Just death sentences. Examples. They say, you think you're better than everyone. You say, no, we just don't think like everyone. They say, you're full of yourself. You say, confidence upsets the insecure. These aren't comebacks. They're status assertions. They don't say, I'm not guilty. They say, you can't touch me. And that's the core. The Machiavellian never begs to be seen as good. He doesn't grovel for approval. He doesn't whimper when accused. He dares them to see him as bad and walks taller for it. Because when you refuse to defend yourself, something strange happens to your enemies. They become unhinged. They expected a battle. Instead, they're swinging at smoke. They escalate. They post more. They vent to others. They expose more of their insecurity. And the more they do that, the higher you rise. Why? Because you've made them perform their own collapse. You didn't destroy them. You let their obsession with you do the job. So understand this. You think being misunderstood is dangerous. But being predictable is far worse. The misunderstood man has mystery. The predictable man is easy to manipulate. People who always try to clear things up come across as desperate. People who remain calmly misunderstood, they're feared. And that fear, that quiet, reverent fear, is where the true Machiavellian lives. Not in the light, not in applause, but in the dark space between perception and silence. The space where power isn't explained. It's assumed. Machiavelli understood a brutal truth. If you can't be both feared and loved, choose fear. But there's an even deeper principle few recognize: it's better to be unpredictable than understood. Because when someone's confused by you, they become cautious. They hesitate. They watch instead of react. And that hesitation gives you the upper hand. You now control the tempo. You dictate the terms. Let's shatter the last illusion. You don't need to be liked to win. You don't need to be seen as good. What you need is a formidable reputation. A good reputation binds you. It expects you to be soft, agreeable, apologetic, to always explain, always smooth things over. But a strong reputation? That's a different beast. It doesn't always win you praise. It doesn't even guarantee trust. But it makes people think twice before crossing you. And that power comes from never defending yourself. Because when you stop explaining and start holding your ground in silence, your reputation stops being about what others believe and starts being about what they fear you might do. That's the inversion. You're no longer seeking acceptance. You're cultivating presence. You create an energy around you, an atmosphere that makes people step carefully. Even your silence becomes loaded. Even your stillness is seen as intentional. Every move you don't make becomes a move in their imagination. And that's the final form of control. Not just silence, but aura. A presence so grounded, so indifferent to chaos, that accusations die before they touch you. A vibe so self-contained, so quietly dominant, that people self-censor in your presence. And here's the irony. It's not because you feel nothing. It's because you've designed yourself to be untouchable. You've trained your emotions not to serve reaction, but strategy. You've learned that defending yourself only puts you on trial. That explaining only shows you care too much what people think. Once you let that go, once you stop chasing approval, you cross a line most never reach. A line where your very existence becomes your answer. You don't argue. You don't justify. You don't chase reputation. And that's when power becomes effortless. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just felt. Think about the rare few who live this way. They don't post rants. They don't correct rumors. They don't respond to gossip. They don't set the record straight. And yet they dominate the room just by being in it. Because they've become a question no one wants to test. Why? Because silence in the face of accusation doesn't signal weakness. It creates myth. It invites interpretation. And the human mind, when left without closure, doesn't default to pity, it defaults to power. It assumes depth. It assumes calculation. It assumes danger. He didn't respond? He must be above it. She didn't explain herself? She must be untouchable. They're still calm while being attacked? They must know something we don't. That mental gap, the one between accusation and silence, is where fear lives, where mystique is born, and where influence begins to harden. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He didn't care about being loved. He didn't care about being seen as moral. He cared about control. And control begins not with reaction but with restraint. The one who never defends himself stays in control of perception. Even when surrounded by lies. Even when others are shouting. Because once you join the noise, you become part of it. But if you remain still, you become something else entirely, a symbol. Here's the paradox most never see. The more you explain yourself, the more alone you appear. Why? Because no one jumps in to support the person who's already pleading their case. When you're talking for yourself, they stay quiet. They watch. But when you stay calm, when you say nothing, when you don't play the game, something strange begins to happen. People step in, not because you asked, but because your silence implies you don't need to ask. That's power. They say things like, "He didn't deserve that. She didn't even respond and you're still going after her? This feels like bullying." Now they're defending you. And what's more powerful than defending yourself? Having others do it for you without a word from your mouth. That's Machiavellian leverage. Let the crowd argue your case. Let others protect your name. You stay above the noise. Beyond the bickering. Unreachable. And suddenly, you're not just respected. You're elevated. It doesn't happen overnight. This kind of power is built like a fortress stone by stone. You build it by refusing to react, by never correcting petty insults, by never responding to every whisper or doubt, by choosing stillness over response, clarity over chaos, timing over urgency. Let's get practical. Start here. Never correct an insult meant to provoke. Let it float. Let it echo in the air. The louder it bounces around without you acknowledging it, the more it loses force. Your silence tells the room it didn't even register. That's psychological warfare. Respond to indirect shots not with offense but with calm curiosity. Say, "Is that how you see it?" Delivered with total serenity, it diffuses the attacker's emotion and returns the burden to them. Or use short, vital closing lines that end conversations before they start. Noted. All right. Think what you like. Time will tell. None of these invite debate. They close the door. Because the Machiavellian doesn't need to win the argument. He needs to end it before it starts. Even your body speaks. Study it. The way you sit. Stand. Hold your eyes. Relax your shoulders. The Machiavellian doesn't flinch, twitch, or tense. Stillness is his armor. Because when others grow loud, emotional, and eradicant, you stay calm, begin to look weak. You become the mirror reflecting their unraveling. When people can't figure out how to provoke you, they start to fear you. Not because you're violent, not because you're loud, but because you're unreadable. That's the Machiavellian advantage. He doesn't fight the attacker. He lets them fall on their own blade. Someone says you're arrogant? Strange how confidence makes people uncomfortable. They say you're manipulative? Only people who can't be influenced say that. They call you fake? That's what people say when they stop getting what they want. You didn't deny the claim. You inverted it. You turned their insult into a reflection of their own insecurity. Now they're the one explaining themselves. Scrambling. Trying to justify why they said what they said. While you remain calm, still, untouched. That's not just strength. That's immunity. Because there's a difference. Strength fights back. It reacts. But immunity doesn't even acknowledge the hit. And immunity is the Machiavellian ideal. You don't need to fight to win. You win by making the fight itself beneath you. When you no longer defend yourself, people stop seeing you as someone on trial. You're no longer in the court of public opinion. You've left that courtroom entirely. The only judgment you care about now is your own. And that shift is seismic. From this point forward, you don't live in defense. You live in definition. You define your image, your tone, your silence, your narrative, and people feel it. They feel the stillness behind your gaze, the danger in your quiet, the certainty in your restraint. You're no longer resisting. You're commanding. And that's when everything changes. The room shifts. The crowd quiets. Your enemies second-guess themselves before they speak. Your name begins to carry weight. Not because you fought for it, but because you never explained it. Never defending yourself doesn't mean you never speak. It means that when you do speak, it's not to prove. It's to shift power. Every word is a move, not a reaction. Because when you remain still while the world spins, when you say nothing, while others scream, when you allow the storm to pass, while you remain grounded, you become the one thing they can't control. A man who answers to no one. And that is when they start to follow. Not because you asked, but because they can feel. You're not seeking permission. You're not asking to be understood. You're not in the game to be liked. You're in the room to define it, and the room knows it.